boys and girls. I know it's been a while, but we are back for day 8, finally. So it's been a very busy 2020, which is now over, and now we welcome in 2021. And so on that great note, we continue to read our story, Kneeknock Rise. And as you know, Ada had said some rather disturbing things to Egan. And so we find out in this reading what exactly happened. So it begins on page 70 and it goes like this. So follow along, get your book, and let's begin. All right, the rain began to fall a little harder now. And all the while Egan was climbing up Kneeknock Rise, and Annabelle climbed after him. "Stop crying, Ada. Calm yourself," said Uncle Anson harshly. "I can't understand a thing you're saying." Aunt Gertrude stood rigid as a post, her hand on her heart, staring at her daughter. Aunt Gertrude was beside herself. "It's Egan, Papa, Egan," sobbed Ada. "He did it. I teased him, Papa, and he did it. He wouldn't stop." "Well, what did he do, Ada? What did Egan do?" cried Uncle Anson, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Oh, Papa," she gulped, turning her face away from the alarm in her father's eyes. "It's all my fault. I dared him, and he's doing it now. He's climbing, Papa. He's climbing Kneeknock Rise." "Merciful heavens!" gasped Uncle Anson, and behind him Aunt Gertrude sagged and dropped in a faint to the floor. In other words, she passed out. And all the while, Egan was climbing up and up over the rocks and weeds, up between the twisted trees, panting with excitement. From time to time, he paused, waiting for Annabelle to catch up with him. The dog's sides were heaving and her tongue dangled sidewise from her jaws, but her stiff old legs churned steadily along, and her eyes were bright. Then all at once it began to rain in earnest, blurring the dim light and shell-lacking the rocks into slippery, treacherous jewels. Egan leaned against a tree trunk to catch his breath, and Annabelle dropped in at his feet. He bent over to scratch her ears, and then suddenly the moaning began. The megarum. It was loud here, halfway up the rise, loud and horrifying and desperate. Down through the trees it twisted with the wind, a long, unearthly moaning that rose gradually till it wound into a high and hollow wail. Egan stood transfixed with his hand on Annabelle's head, and for the first time he was afraid. Now, if you will recall, he didn't believe in any megarum. He was determined to discover what was making that sound. When he was challenged by Ada, he said, "Okay, fine, I will climb up that rise. You're not going to call me a sissy." And so now he's afraid. The megarum was awake at last. In the fields below, the chattering ceased. Faces peered out of tent flaps and windows, serious, frightened, eager. Here and there, a man or a child came out into the rain and stood quietly, listening. An old woman dragged a stool from under a little cart and sat clutching an onion, nodding with her eyes tight shut, while the rain wilted her bonnet down around her ears. Why would she clutch an onion? Do you remember? That's right. It was the way to protect themselves from the megarum. And so if you had an onion or you had a wishbone or a particular candle by your window, you would be safe. And that's why this woman's sitting there with an onion in her hands. The megarum, as I said, was awake. And so now let's see what goes on. But in the village, there was a frantic activity. Uncle Anson, a lantern bobbing from his hand, was rushing from neighbor to neighbor. "Quick, quick, to my house at once. Yes, it's my nephew, my wife's sister's child. He's trying to climb the rise. We've got to stop him." "What do you mean I'm crazy? We can't just let him go." Soon a wet and anxious group of men were arguing and shouting before the fire in the little house, while Ada snuffled miserably in a corner, and Aunt Gertrude rushed back and forth, making coffee, spilling more than she served. "But see here, Anderson, that boy won't climb all the way up," said one of the men. "How do you know he won't?" answered Uncle Anderson grimly. "He doesn't live in Instep. He doesn't understand." "But good Lord, man," cried another, "do you realize what you're saying? You're asking us to climb the rise." "I know what I'm asking," shouted Uncle Anson. "How can you think I don't? But can I let that boy stay out there now? Megarum is wide awake. I've never heard it moan so loud." "Nobody would be fool enough to climb up there," growled another man. "That boy is fool enough, bless him," said Uncle Anson. "And I know my brother Ott would have climbed in an instant to save him. There's fools and fools, my friend. I'm going. Gertrude, where's my cap? I'm going, and I'll go alone if I have to." "I'll go too," said one man. "Me, count me in," said another, "and I'll bring along my bell." And then they were all going, hurrying out into the drenching rain, while high above the moaning rose and fell, winding and rippling like a ribbon down the night. But Egan was half an hour ahead by that time, and he was young and strong, alone and determined. After his first fear, he had clenched his fists and scowled. His early jealousy of the cliff's high pride returned. He searched about him among the trees and found a long, sharp stick. "Look out up there," he yelled into the rain. "I'm coming." Off he went, Annabelle struggling along behind him, and by the time his rescuers were beginning the climb, Egan had come nearly to the top, and the mist that hung there reached out gently and gathered him in. Egan stood uncertainly in the mist. The rain was easing off. There had been no sound from the megarum for many minutes now. A mumble of thunder complained from far away, and then the clouds parted, and the moon rode free. Instantly the mist was luminous, and Egan, with a gasp, felt as if he had suddenly been tucked inside a bubble. Looking up, he saw the moon as a shapeless radiance, like a candle seen through steamy glass. Each drop of moisture in the mist had become a tiny prism, filtering and fanning the dim light into a million pale rainbows of softest color. From a shrouded treetop nearby came the soft, clear notes of a bird's call, and with the faintest of rustles, a small red Kneeknock bird floated through the mist ahead of him. Egan held his breath and stared at the magic world around him, a nighttime world bewitched into seeming morning by the wizard moon. Everything was lit up, basically. That's what she's saying. In a beautiful way, she says this. Annabelle stood silent at his feet, and then all at once the dog stiffened and whined. Nudged in his trance, Egan bent to soothe her, but she pulled away from his hand. Her ear is high. She whined again, moved forward, stopped with a tilted head, listening. Then with a yelp, she ran on into the mist and disappeared. From somewhere up ahead, a low groan echoed, and Egan, his stick in his hand, moved slowly after Annabelle, straight toward the top of Kneeknock Rise. Now, what was Annabelle all of a sudden excited about? You've been on a walk, maybe, with a dog, and maybe your dog picks up a scent and wants to run ahead of you. Something's going on because Annabelle decided to take off. And so Egan with his stick is going to follow Annabelle now. Now, do you think that maybe having Annabelle with him made him a little bit newly brave, so he's not quite as afraid? Perhaps. Let's see what happens next. On the cliffside below, the rescuers paused. "The storm is over. Look, there's the moon," said one of the men, "and the megarum's been quiet for a while now." "Look here, Anson," said another. "I think we should search around a bit. That boy of yours can't have gone all the way up. He must be somewhere about. Perhaps, said Uncle Anson. We'll divide up and look. But if we don't find him, I'm going on to the top. So notice that the men want to stay at the base of the mountain, maybe go a little bit up, but they don't want to go to the very top where the megamum is. With swaying arcs of lantern light washing the dark, the men spread out among the trees along the side of the rise. Below, in her garden, behind the little house, Aunt Gertrude stood, wringing her hands. She could hear faintly the tinkling of the bell, warning away the megamum, and heard as well the distant, muffled voice of her husband calling, Egan, Egan, where are you? Nephew, Egan. And so these are the sounds that she's hearing. The little bell to frighten the megamum, and then the calling of Egan. Where are you, Egan? A boy, you say? What? Climbing up the rise? A terrible thing, terrible. Out in the field, the visitors knew something had happened, and so the dialogue begins. Where was the boy's mother, then, to let him run away? We're climbing up to find him. Look, see the lights of the lanterns? Brave men all. Never come down again, ever. In other words, they believe that they will never be back, that the megamum will have eaten everybody. Let's see. Egan, deep in the mist, heard nothing. He wandered up the final stony slope toward the top like a sleepwalker lost in dreams. The heavy air around him, tinted and dim and moist, was growing unaccountably warmer, and a faint, unpleasant smell he could not quite recognize crept into his nostrils. And then he stopped, chilled. Suddenly, out of his trance, just ahead there came a noise, as if an animal was thrashing about, and a low rumble of a voice. So Egan crept forward, grasping the nearly forgotten stick tightly, and his heart pounding. The megamum, at last, the megamum. Slay it, perhaps, but at least he would see it. More thrashing in the weeds ahead. Oh, wanna, the voice seemed to murmur. Closer and closer crept Egan, and then he saw it dimly, all flailing arms rolling on the ground. Another few cautious steps, and then, oh, Anna, dear old dog, crooned the voice. There before him, sitting on the ground, was a wild-haired, laughing man who had to be his Uncle Ott, engulfed and struggling happily in the wriggling, wagging ecstasy of Annabelle. Egan stood with his mouth hanging open. The stick dropped from his hand, and at the sound of the man and the dog paused in their greeting, looked toward him. Annabelle trotted over and beamed at him, and then turned back, as if probably to greet Egan and then go back to Uncle Ott. Hello there, boy. Who might you be? Said the man warily, a little cautiously. Egan gulped. Why, I'm your nephew, sort of. That is, if you really are my Uncle Ott. My Uncle Anson's brother. Are you? Are you Uncle Ott? That's right, said Uncle Ott in great surprise. And you must be Anson's wife's sister's boy. So let me pause for a moment and show you the picture. And here is Uncle Ott, just loving being with Annabelle, and Annabelle being with Uncle Ott, and they're at the top of the rise, and they're both happy to see each other. I guess I've got that right, but what in the name of goodness are you doing up here? I came, Egan paused. Well, I came to kill the megamum. He waited for his uncle to laugh or scold, but Ott did neither. He merely nodded as if it were all quite natural. But where is the megamum? Asked Egan, and why is it so awfully warm up here? Uncle Ott stood up and brushed bits of twigs and leaves from his clothes. The megamum, yes, I came to find it too. He paused and looked thoughtfully at Egan, and then in a rush he said, Boy, listen to me. There isn't any megamum. Never was. It's all been just a lot of nothing all these years. Just a lot of megamummery, if you will. It's too bad. That's what it is. Too bad. Come along. I'll show you. Close to the top of Kneeknock Rise lay a shallow cave. At the mouth of the cave, the mist was very thick and as hot as steam, and the strange unpleasant smell was almost overwhelming. Phew, said Egan. What in the world is in there? It must be something very rotten and dreadful. No, not at all, said Uncle Ott. It's only a mineral spring, sulfur. Nasty, but not unnatural. You know, sulfur kind of has the scent of maybe like rotten eggs. If you've ever smelled a rotten egg, that's the smell of sulfur. And that's what it smelled like at the top of the rise. A spring, puzzled Egan. But how could it be a spring? Springs aren't hot. Sometimes they are, said Uncle Ott. This cliff must have been a volcano long ago. The water boils up to the top through a narrow hole, far under the earth, where it's very hot, and that makes a steamy mist. Usually the hole lets the steam through quietly, but when rain seeps into the hot places, more pressure, more steam, and the steam makes a whistling, whining, moaning sound as it shoots out the top of the hole, just like a boiling kettle. The cave echoes and it makes the sound even louder, and that, my dear boy, is the long-feared, long-loved Megremon. Egan stood and stared, and then all at once he was very pleased. I knew it. I knew this old cliff wasn't so wonderful, he said. Can I go in there and look at the spring? Uncle Ott shook his head. Too hot, he said. And anyway, there's not much to it. Just a hole in the ground and a lot of hot rocks. He shook his head again and sighed. Too bad about that. Just a hole in the ground. They turned away from the cave and walked back to where Annabelle sat waiting for them. Come down to Instep with me and we'll tell them about it, said Egan. We can both sleep in your room. I'll sleep on the floor with Annabelle. No, I think I won't go down to Instep, said Uncle Ott, running his fingers through his wild white hair. Now that I've got my own dear Annabelle with me, and I do thank you for bringing her up, I guess I'll just go on down the other side. Have you been up here all the time? Asked Egan. Yes, as a matter of fact, I have. I came up thinking I'd be going right back down again, so I didn't bring Annabelle. And anyway, I was afraid she'd have trouble with climbing. When I got up here, the air was so wet and hot. Well, it just did wonders for my wheezing. So you might be wondering, why is he up there in the first place? So it's moist, it's like a humidifier, and he needs it for his health. Absolutely wonders. See, I can breathe perfectly well. He took several deep breaths to show that it was true. It's been a blessing, but now I guess I'll move along. Egan had a sudden idea. It was you that night, wasn't it, tapping at the window? Uncle Ott looked embarrassed. That was too bad. I thought I could get Annabelle to come to the window and then I could lift her out and take her away with me. But there was Gertrude all of a sudden screaming and I had to go away. I felt very bad about scaring her. But I don't see why you didn't come into the house, said Egan, during the day and take Annabelle then. Because, said Uncle Ott slowly, I didn't want to have to explain. Egan was puzzled. About the Megremon, you mean, he asked. Why not? They're all scared to death of the Megremon. They'd be happy to hear that there isn't one after all. Do you think so? Said Uncle Ott. I really don't know about that. I've been thinking about that. He looked at Egan sadly. Is it better to be wise if it makes you solemn and practical, or is it better to be foolish so you can go on enjoying yourself? The king and the fool, said Egan suddenly, understanding. Exactly. So what he's saying is, is it better to just play pretend and be happy, not really knowing the truth? Or is it better to know the truth and be unhappy to know the truth? It's almost like, people who believe or don't believe in, let's say, fairies on the lawn or the, Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus or any of those mystical creatures and things. Because you know what? You really don't know. You might be sitting there right now listening to me and saying, oh, there's none of those things. But You know, we live in a vast universe, and I would say that we certainly don't know all the mechanisms to it. So for me, I'd rather be foolish so I can go enjoy myself. I don't know about you, so you think about it. What would you prefer? Anyway, exactly, said Uncle Ott, exactly. I see you've been reading my verses. I've been interested for years in this problem of kings and fools. Remember now, the king is the one who wants the truth and be miserable, and the fool is the one who goes on pretending and is happy. And here I am with a perfect example of the question, and I really don't know the answer. He sat down on the ground beside Annabelle and stared off into the mist, rubbing his chin. For me, it's always been important to find out the why of things, to try to be wise, but I can't say it's ever made me happier. As for those people down below, they've had their megamum for years and years, and I don't know as I want to spoil it all for them. There's always the possibility that they're happier believing. Don't you agree? It gives them something to do, to believe in the megamum, to bring people there to see the fair and to listen and hear. And this is obviously before we had cell phones and internet and what have you. Kind of a nice idea, this megamum. He stood up and pulled his jacket close around his chest, breathing the mist deeply. Yes, it's kind of a nice idea in an odd kind of way, he said. Do as you like about it. If I knew what was best, I'd certainly tell you. But the fact is, I don't. Well, come along, Annabelle. Goodbye, nephew. A pleasure to have seen you. He started off, and then he paused and stood thinking for a moment. At last he turned and came back. I just had another thought on the matter, he said. It came to me in a rhyme. Thoughts often come to me that way. I don't seem to be able to help it. Okay? So listen. The cat, this is the rhyme. I'm going to read this section here on page 89. The cat attacked a bit of string and dragged it by the head and tortured it beside the stove and left it there for dead. Excuse me, sir, I murmured when he passed me in the hall, but that was only string you had and not a mouse at all. He didn't even thank me when I told him he was wrong. It's possible, just possible, he knew it all along. So let's dig in deep and think about it. So here's a cat playing with a string, and the person who's walking past says to the cat, you know, that was just a string, and you're acting like that was a mouse, the way you're carrying on. But the mouse didn't react because he didn't tell him, well, you're wrong. Why? Because maybe he knew it all along. The cat knew all along that it was just a string. And so this reminds me of my own cat that was running around my bedroom chasing, and I was looking to see, what is it chasing? Well, it wasn't chasing anything, just playing, maybe a little ball of dust or something. And his behavior was just the way it probably would be if he had a mouse in his claws. But in this case, there was no mouse, but he acted as though it was, having his fun, pretending. So maybe when he says that he knew it all along, who else might know it all along? So think about that. I'm at the top of page 90. Well, there it is, for what it's worth. Goodbye. Uncle Ott smiled, and then with Annabelle wagging at his side, he turned and vanished into the mist. So this is a really important, I would say, a place to pause, that he's sort of given Egan information. He is aware that now Egan also knows that there was none. There was no megamum ever. And yet the entire town believes that there was. So what would you do? Would you go down and say, hey guys, you can stop forgetting all your worries because there's no monster up here? Or would you let it go? So we're going to read a couple of more pages, and then we'll stop and see what Egan does. So how many of you out there think he's going to tell? How many of you think he's not? I can't see your hands, but think about it. Okay, here we go. The last couple pages for day 8 again. When his uncle was gone, Egan went back again to the mouth of the cave and stood near the hot steam, listening to the gurgle of the spring and thinking. Then at last he said to himself, Uncle Ott is pretty foolish after all. They don't know about this cave. They couldn't know and act the way that they do. They'll be glad when I tell them the truth. He smiled. I did slay the Megrumum in a way, or at least I'll slay it now. He picked up a good-sized rock that lay at the entrance to the cave and heaved it into the mist inside. There was a hollow, heavy clink, and at once the gurgling stopped. Egan listened, and then he grinned with elated surprise. That's a pretty good shot, he crowed to himself. That old rock will stop up the hole, and there'll be no more moaning from this Megrumum. He realized all at once that he was wet to the skin and very hungry. He turned away from the cave and ran through the mist, emerging from its fringes into a cold, clear night. The moon was high and bright, and below him the windows of Instep glowed snugly within the winking arc of the visitors' campfires. He stood looking down, clutching himself with pleasure over the news he was bringing. The great and staggering news. I'll be famous, he whispered breathlessly. They'll tell about what I did for years to come. A twinge of qualifying honesty nudged him, and he added, of course, Uncle Ott will be famous too. He came up first. And Annabelle. He shivered and remembered again that he was wet and hungry. Egan and Ott and Annabelle, he sang under his breath as he bounded down the side of the rise toward Instep. Egan and Ott and Annabelle, Egan, and woof, for he had bumped unseen right into the arms of Uncle Anson. Egan, are you all right? Thank goodness I found you, nephew. You didn't go all the way up to the top, did you? Where's the dog? Uncle Anson, listen. Uncle Anson, listen. I did go all the way to the top, and guess who I found? Your brother was up there, Uncle Ott. And listen, Uncle Anson, I went and looked. There is nothing but a spring up there, a spring in a cave. There isn't any Megrumum. But Uncle Ott had clapped his hand over Egan's mouth. Hush, he cried. Hush now. You're all excited, probably coming down with a fever. Look, you're soaked through. Not another word, not a peep. I'll have to get you home right away. He wrapped one arm firmly around Egan's shoulder, and they started down the slope. Just below them, in a clump of trees, the lights of other lanterns glowed. Hello down there, called Uncle Anson, hustling Egan along. I found him. He's all right. Let's go home. But the rescuers were suddenly crowding around him, holding their lanterns high and peering with relief into Egan's face. So you're safe, foolish boy. You might have been killed. And think what we risked climbing up to save you. But listen, cried Egan, twitching out of Uncle Anson's grasp. Listen, I went clear up there and looked, and there isn't any Where's the dog? Interrupted one of the men. Anison, didn't you say he climbed with your brother's dog? That's a shame the Megrumum got to the dog, eh? But there isn't any Egan began again. That boy looks feverish to me, Anison, said another man. Better get him home right away. Too bad about the dog, but you're lucky the boy got away. Egan began to shout, listen to me. I went and looked. There isn't any Megrumum up there. At once there was total silence. The men stood looking at him, expressionless, and he looked back at them and felt a nudge of uncertainty. Whoops, Egan's wondering, uh-oh. He said more quietly, there never was any Megrumum, and the men waited, watching him. It's only a spring in a cave, he finished in a very small voice. After a long moment, one of the men cleared his throat. No Megrumum? Well, that's certainly something. A spring in a cave, hundreds of years, and no Megrumum? There was another uncomfortable silence, and then they all started talking at once. Anson, that boy is feverish. feverish. He's delirious. Better take him home. He doesn't know what he's saying. That's right. He doesn't know what he's saying. And they turned away and started down the hillside, muttering to themselves. Uncle Anson sighed and took Egan's hand. Let's go home, nephew. But look, Uncle Anson, Egan pleaded, there really isn't any Megrimum. Uncle Ott explained it all about the spring and the cave and everything. It's really true. Uncle Anson shrugged. Perhaps we'll talk about it later. Let's go home. It's been a long day. So I'm stopping on page 95. And so you guys think about the reaction of the townspeople, the people that were out there trying to save him, the reaction of Egan, even after he said it. Remember, is it best to be wise, knowing, or is it best to be foolish, pretending? So let's see what happens and how Uncle Anson handles this, and what Egan, his reaction is, and how he copes with knowing something he knows to be true and nobody really believing him. So, you know, in issues of belief, I think everyone has many different beliefs. And I think that's the joy of life, is that you're all entitled to whatever you want to believe. And, you know, I don't know if you want to spoil somebody else's fun with your knowledge or what have you, but it's something to think about. Okay, and so until next time, when we pick up day 9, I believe, this was day 8 reading. All right, kids, be well, hang in there, and Happy New Year to everybody. Bye, everybody.